and welcome to That Time on That Trip, where we connect through sharing lessons learned on times in the great outdoors. Our guest today is Morgan. Welcome, Morgan. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, my pleasure. So, if you could give people a few sentences of the Morgan origin story, the Morgan origin, what would that be?
Oh, wow. So I was born and raised in Florida. I still currently live here. I grew up mostly just like outside, playing a lot. I was an only child, so I kind of tried to entertain myself a lot, especially outside at any chance I could get. My love for hiking grew probably when I was in middle school, and we would take trips up to Tennessee and visit family up there and then go hiking on little mountain trails then. In college, I studied environmental studies, and that really kind of cemented my love for nature and my love for Florida. I learned a lot about Florida's unique geography and landscaping, and so I think I just kind of flourished from there. Now I just kind of hike during my free time, trying to hit little trails here in Florida. Even though it's more flat, there's still a lot of beauty in that. So I think that sums it up.
I love Florida so much. It's such a unique place. So that's awesome. You get to spend a lot of time out there. When you said you majored in environmental science, the story we're about to hear takes place at the end of your study abroad in Tanzania. So I'm wondering, was that part of your studies, or were you wanted to study abroad and that happened to be the trip for you?
Yeah, so actually that trip was through, I think it was the political science field. So it was acted as its own class, like a month-long class that just took place abroad. And even though it wasn't an environmental class, there were environmental components in it. And then also, yes, I just wanted to study abroad, and I really, really had always wanted to go visit Tanzania, and like specifically Tanzania. And so I was like, what a perfect opportunity to be able to do this.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting. Was it a hard application process, and did you have to cross your fingers to get in, or was it pretty straightforward?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, they only selected, I think there were maybe 15 of us, maybe 15, 20 of us that ended up getting to go. And so we had to fill out kind of an essay style different questions that they had for us, and then we had an interview process after, and the interview process was really just to see how would our personalities all fit in with each other, and would we be able to basically live with each other for a month. And the conditions are very, like, we're in tight quarters, we're rooming with each other, and like we're all in a communal shared space pretty much. So it all actually worked out really well, where we all got along perfectly, and I think everybody's personalities bounced off of each other really well.
Yeah, that's awesome. On trips like that, it's really like if people could get along, that's like makes it 10 times better.
Yes,
So
100%.
with it being such a small, close-knit group, did all of you get to do the Kilimanjaro trip, or just a part of the group?
Yeah, so it was only 4 of us that ended up going. There were going to be, I think, 5 or 6, but some of the people ended up getting sick towards the end of the study abroad trip, so they decided to, recover. And it was just 4 of us that went.
That's awesome. So when you got to go to Tanzania, what was your day-to-day like in the study abroad program? What did it look like there? Just can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the way that it was structured was the first week and a half, we stayed in a convent. So we had nuns preparing meals for us. That was really cool. So what we would do is we would wake up around 7 in the morning, and then we would eat breakfast that they had prepared for us, and then we would drive maybe half an hour into town. And these drives were not always easy because if it had rained the night prior, you know, all these roads are not paved. So sometimes we would have to take like hour-long detours just to get into town because we would get stuck in clay or, you know, just things would happen. So, but yeah, and then once we would get into town, they would have different kind of plans for us with each day. So there would be a few days that we had spent building those compost piles. Another few days we had spent doing the vegetable gardens. And then the last few days that we were there, we actually helped the community dig trenches to fit really large water pipes in the ground, because the way that they would access water was they would have to hike down super steep, super slippery slopes to a water well that had been placed there years and years ago. And these are families of like 15 plus people per family. So there were probably about 300 people just within this little community. So that's how 300 people had accessed water. So we had dug this trench and were able to supply, like they were able to access water in town rather than having to hike out for it. So we would spend our days, you know, working on these projects, and then we would have like an hour or 2 hour long lunch and kind of like really chill and get to know the community members that we were working with. And then we would finish off in the afternoon, and then we would go back to the convent, have dinner, and then those evenings we would spend like playing cards and like just sitting around a fire, and it was very fun.
Love that. What a time.
Sorry, and then like during parts of the trip, so we spent most of our time in Tanzania, and then we did go to Kenya for like the last few days and stayed on a homestead. But in between that period, we did safari trips. So we like camped in the Serengeti, which was insane. It was incredible. We could literally hear hyenas howling like throughout the night, or just like cackling throughout the night. And then we went to Ngorongoro Crater, which is this massive, like, I forget how wide it is, but it's this massive crater that you drive down within, and it has its own, like, little ecosystem within it. So there's, like, water buffaloes, zebras, rhinos, like, all sorts of animals living in there. And, yeah, just very cool. Very cool.
Wow. That's actually what I was about to ask about. What were the animals like in the flatland? So that's so cool.
Yeah.
You got to explore. Going to a new country, a lot of people like get sick because of the water, or just something is different. How do you have any stuff going on being in a new country, a new part of the world?
Oh yeah. yeah. And I think a lot of it too was just the diet. Like, it was way more fresh food. You know, it was literally like farm to table. So
cool.
Yeah, it was like our gut biomes had to acclimate to the freshness of it. And so all of us definitely struggled, like probably throughout the whole trip, honestly. We didn't fully acclimate to the diets, but towards the end we were like, okay, I think we can get used to this. But yeah, it was a lot. It wasn't so much the water, but it was the, like, food itself, because it was so fresh.
Wow. Did you ever, before Kilimanjaro, did you ever go up in elevation?
Not really, no. Like, we never reached probably over, like, 6,000 feet in elevation. Oh, are you saying, like, in general? Like,
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly.
But yeah, not on that trip. We didn't really go super high in elevation. Until that time, I almost died on that Kilimanjaro trip. In June of 2018, I embarked on a study abroad trip to Tanzania that focused on community development and sustainable gardening. There, we were taught by community members how to develop a steaming pile of compost, how to create a backyard vegetable garden, and how to enjoy life a little more. We provided the body power while they provided the wisdom. At the end of the trip, a few students and I decided to hike Mount Kilimanjaro. Besides, when's the next chance we could do this? We decided to go with an excursion company, as not all of us had backpacking experience then. We would hike with guides while Sherpas carried our bags up the mountain. The trip would be 6 days and 5 nights, which is longer than the typical guided climb. Opting for an additional day to acclimate to altitude, we could take a day to enjoy more views. Being a Florida girl, Lord knows I definitely needed that extra day. We would hike the Marangu route, one of the mountain's more popular routes because it allows hikers to view both of Kilimanjaro's barbarous peaks, Uhuru and Moenzi. Uhuru is the only peak hikers can climb as Moenzi is too jagged and threatening. The company we were hiking with included a stay in a very nice hotel about 20 minutes from the start of the hike. The evening before we embarked, I began to develop a migraine. Great, I thought. I can barely finish dinner and I have to be ready to hike my biggest hike tomorrow morning. I decided to call my dad for some encouragement. My head was pounding and I wasn't sure if this was a good idea anymore. He reassured me that this was a dream of mine and that I would be okay. After speaking with my dad, I just decided to call it a night and go to bed, crossing my fingers that this wasn't foreshadowing. In the morning, we met our guides and headed to the base of the mountain, where we would check in and register our hike. There were about 50 other hikers ready to do the same, all filling the air with anticipation. Once we triple-checked all of our supplies and registered our hikes, we began the journey. The initial ascent took us through dense jungle with a clear path guiding our way. As we climbed, hikers were descending with either grins or battered faces, but they all cheered us on, knowing the journey on which we were embarking. I grew more excited with each step I took. Green rained down around us, and mist filled the air as the cool winter humidity graced our skin. About 2 hours in, we stopped for lunch on the side of a forest road. Off in the distance, we heard sirens, and a few moments later, emergency vehicles passed us by as we exchanged glances, curious and on guard. The reality of this trek began to set in. Would we be okay? Around 4 p.m., we reached camp for the night, the Mandara huts. As we approached, I could hear the trees rustling, producing more noise than wind creates. I peered upwards to notice colobus monkeys swinging amongst the treetops. Wow, I thought to myself, we're really here. Carelessly traversing tree limbs, I felt we had met our greeting committee. Our cabins were wooden A-frame structures perched on stilts, containing a room with a bunk bed and 2 floor beds. As we were sitting and remarking on the day waiting for dinner, our guide Dennis knocked on our door to take us on a little adventure. A quick walk up the mountain to get a clear view of Uhuru Peak. We reached a patch of soft, hairy grass and peered through the hilltops only to notice a faint yet glaring peak in the distance. To think we would be at the top in just 4 days. We arrived back to camp, greeted by the aromas of a fresh dinner. The meals were always my favorite, mostly because I was starving, but also because the worldly chefs took care to prepare meals that were unique to their cultures, while also providing us the nutrition we needed for our hikes. During dinner, we received some tips about how to be successful on this hike and bonded with our crew a little more. Come evening, we were all exhausted. We retired to our bunks and slept soundly through the night. We awoke around 6 a.m. to the sounds of monkeys switching between cabin rooftops and tree limbs. Preparing for our day, we filled our waters and ate a delicious breakfast, then prepped with our team on the day's agenda. We were off to reach the halfway point. Day two's terrain led us through grassy meadows and rocks. Lots and lots of rocks to climb. With every turn arrived a new sense of awe and magic. The land was alive and breathing, whispering hello with every blade of grass swaying. I felt this was always where I was supposed to be. The air was dry yet misty, and the ground crunched or tumbled beneath us. Our footing was paramount during this section. We still wanted to summit, of course, so every step we took counted toward reaching our goals. We arrived at our camp for night two, Harambo huts, which would be our camp for nights two, three, and five, as this was the camp at which we would acclimate, sitting about 12,000 feet in elevation, or 3,720 meters. This was by far my favorite camp because it was positioned on the side of the mountain, just above the cloud line. On a clear night, you could see the town of Moshi alit below us, and on a foggy morning, the clouds sat just along the cliff. It was magical. Here is where the ravens began to appear. Kilimanjaro is thick with wildlife, but the ravens were one of my favorites to witness. More on this later. We were quickly accustomed to our camp routines and changed out of our hiking clothes into camp clothes. It was close to dinner, so we didn't do much that night besides read, eat, and go to bed. Day three was our quote unquote easy day. We did a shorter hike and explored some interesting geological features called zebra rocks, which went up to 4,000 meters in elevation. These rocks are old lava cliffs with markings that resemble the stripes of a zebra caused by mineral-rich rainwater changing the color of the rocks. Harambo Camp was equipped with a shower, which was empty during this day since everyone was out hiking, so we ventured off and treated ourselves to a shower. The icy water was not so shocking, as we had spent the previous few weeks only showering in cold water. My body quickly grew used to it and enjoyed a little jolt of energy with each shower. It was a lovely day to explore the camp and meditate with the wildlife. We sat on the edge of the mountain and watched clouds pass by. Day four, we began our long hike to the base camp, Kibo Huts. This day was challenging as we finished climbing over rocks the first half, then traversed through the alpine desert the second half. It's funny though, what we found hard was just another day for people who lived and worked here. They would hike up and down this mountain multiple times a day, often with 30-foot long planks of wood atop their shoulders, but all with a smile on their face. Remember when I mentioned the ravens? Well, this is where I fell in love with them. When we stopped for lunch, we went to a frequented picnic area. Tired and disappointed with the amount of trash people left behind, I was a bit grumpy. People could really be so gross, and no one was advised to dig a cat hole, so let's just say the spot in the Alpine desert was where you'd meet your neighbor's breakfast. Through my disappointment, however, I could hear gusts of wind sweeping between the peaks and valleys of this land. As I looked up to recognize it, I noticed it wasn't actually wind, but the sounds of raven wings cutting through the wind. Due to the thin air at that high of an altitude, the sound that emits from their wings' flap is amplified, so much so that it sounds like the wind itself. These birds were massive, and they flocked right next to any hiker they could steal food from. I sat there with tears in my eyes, astonished at the magnificence of nature. Or maybe it was the exhaustion catching up with me. After miles of hiking through sand, a balaclava covering my face, and fighting with my hat to protect me from the sun, even though I just wanted to fly with the wind, we finally arrived at base camp. I was so happy to be over 15,000 feet above elevation, like we were almost there. Something about this camp felt eerie, though. I feel many people had tough decisions and hard experiences at this camp. Instead of our group having our own cabin, we shared a room with a few other hikers. Bunk beds lined the walls, and we quickly claimed one to lie down in. We prioritized rest this evening, as this was the night when we wouldn't get much sleep. We would nap for around 3 hours and begin our hike in the pitch black night. Dinner was served, and we quickly laid down. My alarm went off at midnight. Crap, I thought. My head is killing me. Not again. Not again. Feeling nauseous too, I had no idea how I would eat this platter of crackers and light bites our team graciously laid out for us. Activated charcoal became my friend on this trip. but I knew not to take it if I had nothing in my stomach. So I forced a bite of a cracker and tried to convince my guides I was too ill to summit. They were so kind and refused to let me quit. They were seasoned guides, and while I was exhibiting altitude sickness symptoms, none of these symptoms alluded to any serious complications. It was about 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and we had a hike to finish, dang it. So I did what I always do when I feel like shit, but I gotta keep moving. I try to have fun with it. Making myself laugh or funny faces with my partners was all I could do, and sleepless delirium supported me in that quest. In our goofy states, I glanced up the mountain and saw the faint headlamps of hikers who had already begun their summit, an intimidating yet exciting view, knowing we would be that for the other people. It was almost 12:30 a.m., and our guides really wanted to get us moving. We filled up our water packs and placed them upside down in our packs so they wouldn't freeze. Then we had our extra liters of water stored deeper in our bags and upside down to prevent freezing. We start at night because the snow quickly melts off the peak as the sun rises, causing icy and slippery terrain, and it's important to keep our footing stable. Everything is frozen, it just depends on how frozen. So we began our journey. The motto we all used to keep us going was pole pole, which translated to slow, slow in Swahili. This was one of those put your head down and hike days, or should I say nights. Between fighting my headache and fighting nausea, I was a mess. All I could focus on was the next step. I didn't even have the energy to analyze if this was something I was capable of anymore. I just had to move. After all, thought of turning around in the dead of night with the steep slope behind me sounded worse than continuing forward. Uhuru Peak is so steep that the whole hike up is switchbacks. There isn't a clear trail because it's covered and recovered in snow, and the switchbacks change every few steps just to ensure you aren't moving at too steep of an angle at any point. It was so cold, and I was so exhausted that I would close my eyes and nap during our less than 5-minute breaks. When I did this, time stood still. I realized that if I was by myself and I did this, I would probably die from freezing to death. And the more I thought about it, the more I was okay with it. I knew I obviously wouldn't die because of the people I was with, but I had a rush of acceptance with death, skating right next to it on the summit climb. Sitting and relaxing during these breaks was too dangerous because we wanted to keep our body heat elevated, and we risked getting too comfortable while seated, so many of these breaks were standing. On one of our rests, I went off to use the bathroom. There isn't much privacy here because it's fully exposed, but we did our best to turn our backs. On this break, I noticed a tinge of red in the snow, and it dawned on me that I had started my period. Great. Another thing. My head was pounding so hard and I was beginning to cramp, so I just took ibuprofen on an empty stomach and prayed. Something was better than nothing, and even though I accepted death a few moments prior, I still had a will to fight it. To help with my nausea, I would take baby sips of water. We were only halfway up this hike, and it was probably around 2:33 in the morning. During another break, I was able to stomach a single cracker and tried to wash it down with water. But oddly, nothing was coming out of my camelback. Was it stuck in an odd position? I pulled it out to look at it and quickly realized that I had drank all my water in my feet to combat nausea. I turned to our guide and asked if he could help me get my other bottle out. He was shocked that I had already went through some of my reserve, but he helped me. When he pulled out my bottle, he hesitated and then told me that it had all frozen. What? Wait, wait. I thought placing it upside down prevented it from freezing. Well, apparently that trick didn't work this time, so I was completely out of water. Defeated, I accepted what I couldn't change. There wasn't much left for me to do at this point besides continue. At this time of my life, I listened to a lot of Frank Ocean, and one of his song lyrics echoed through my head as we continued. God gives you what you can handle. It became my mantra as I continued this hike, and it honestly motivated me to keep going. Turning around wasn't an option, and sitting and freezing to death wasn't one either. So, sing and pole pole. Around 4 a.m., we reached Gilman's Point, and in my body's perfect fashion and funny way of embracing things, I grew very sick. Dennis rubbed my back while my hiking partners ate a larger breakfast, while I couldn't keep mine down. All this water, all this 1.5 crackers, and 2 ibuprofen later, nothing could help me now. Keep moving. God gives you what you can handle. God gives you what you can handle. The sun was beginning to rise, and hints of blue and green filled the skyline. It felt like we were at the top of the world, and the sun was rising just for us, as if we were the only witnesses to his magnificence. Through my pain and upset stomach, I was still in awe somehow. What was this winter wonderland we were traversing through? Snowbanks on either side of us. We were sandwiched between snowbanks and cliffs, forcing us to be hyper aware of our footing through our deliriums. On we came to Stella Point, another milestone marker to Uhuru Peak. We were less than 1 hour from the top. The sunrise was growing more pink, and we knew we had to hurry. Picking up our pace, we would glance up to see if we could rubberneck our way to the top. The humor and sleep deprivation is in the childlike wonder that comes out of you then. Everything is amazing, and you are afraid of nothing. We were less than 10 minutes from the summit, and we were racing our way up, unbothered by the knowledge that we would get less than 5 minutes at the top, just enough for a few photos and to embrace the view in the moment. We turned our final corner, and it felt like a victory. We were crying and laughing and mostly so confused as to how we even got there. We took turns taking photos of each other with the sign and then stood watching the sunrise. Naively, I plopped down and I just wanted to sit. We just hiked all this way. Mama needs a rest. Dennis quickly walked over to me and pulled me up, instructing us we had to stay moving. So down we went. As we reached Stella's Point again, I looked up at the view and a wave of vertigo washed over me. I looked at the ground and all I could see was the ground zooming out from beneath me. The world was spinning and I was about to go down. I turned around and said, "Something's not right." And as I said that, Dennis grabbed my arm and started pulling me down the mountain with him. I just remember my feet moving faster than my head. I could barely walk, but it was important to descend as fast as possible to increase our blood oxygen levels. We passed Gilman's Point again, and I felt like I was greeting an old friend. Still, unable to stop, we kept moving. We wanted to wait until we were below 4,500 meters in elevation to take our break. We wanted to get off the snow and back onto the rocks. After Gilman's Point, the descent became seamless. Small pebbles sat atop the mountain face, and we could only ski down them. Due to how steep the mountain was, the slippery nature of the pebbles, and the lack of a path, you embraced the downhill slide and went for it. It was liberating and carefree. After so much struggle, you could slide your worries away. We reached an area where more boulders sat and decided to take a short break again. I guess the motion of sliding caught up with me and I grew sick again, but it was worth it. What took us hours to ascend took less than 1 hour to descend. We arrived back at Kibo Hut and we were greeted by Sherpas with orange juice in their hands, celebrating our accomplishments and giving us huge hugs. Happiness doesn't begin to describe the rush of emotions that coursed through our bodies. Reaching lower altitude was still a priority, so we quickly exchanged our gratitudes and then continued embarking down toward Harambo huts where we would spend that evening. There was no time for napping, we just had to stomach the sleep deprivation. Thankfully, my stomach quickly settled once we continued our hike to Harambo. Back through the desert we hiked, and the winds were still just as brutal. I honestly do not even remember the hike down to Harambo. Everything else felt like a blur. The descent was so rapid that it only took us a few hours to reach camp, and we pretty much ate and rested the rest of the day. The next morning, we arose and continued our trek down, remarking on the prior day and enjoying what was left of this fleeting experience. Embracing every moment and taking in the surrounding environment, I grieved the inevitable, the goodbye. As much as I was ready to be in a real bed and take a warm shower, this experience undoubtedly changed me. I felt the winds of the sky course through my veins and the grounding of earth vibrate through me. I felt at one with their elements. After we finished the hike, I was trying to spiritually make sense of my experience. At the time, I was studying the Hindu deity Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation, and I felt that he destroyed and transformed me. Now, after hindsight, I feel as though his lover, Kali, really reigns over Kilimanjaro. She is a grand force, a protector, yet also governs the laws of destruction and rebirth. And I feel that is what happened inside of me during this trek. I was destroyed, and I was not only transformed, but also reborn. I came to understand new qualities about myself. As fleeting as this experience was, the feelings that coursed through me during it stay with me to this day. I will always maintain a sense of wonder when in nature. I honor and greet every piece of nature I meet as I would a fellow human. Our world is so sacred, and we are here to take care of her. She deserves our respect and gratitude. I did not conquer Mount Kilimanjaro. She conquered me, and I am so grateful that she granted me permission to walk on her land and experience her nature.
Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to share it and for wanting to hear it.
It's such an epic experience. I can't imagine going through that. What's it like? I know this was a few years ago. Was it 6 years ago?
Yeah, yeah.
What was it like reflecting back on this now?
Honestly, it was really amazing to relive it almost. As I was typing this, I was remembering all these details again, and I hadn't really given it that much thought in so long, and I don't often talk about it because it's kind of like embarrassing to, it's like I don't want to just tell people this. So it was really fun, and I was just so thankful to be able to reflect back on it and look at all these old photos again and just like almost feel like I was reliving it in some way. So yeah.
I love that. How cool. So if you could go back in time to the moment you had the migraine at the hotel before your trip, if you could talk to that version of you, would you give her the advice to reschedule or just let it be? What would you do?
I definitely think I would tell her to just sleep it off and recoup in the morning, see how you feel in the morning. Because that's a thing with migraines, especially, I don't know if you experience that, but I do sometimes. And so the biggest thing is just rest. And, like, I would tell her you came all this way, what an opportunity this is, and to just pass it up from feeling ill one night, I think you would regret it. So I think you should take this step and just continue to try to persevere through it.
I don't know if I have migraines actually. I know I have really bad headaches, but sometimes I'm not sensitive to light. So I don't really know if they're migraines or not. That's a good tip. I'll remember that.
Yeah. They also will make me nauseous. And that's what happened that night. I didn't include that in the story.
Gosh.
I don't know if you want to include this now, but yeah.
Man, I feel so bad for you because I'm sure you were so excited and it was a feeling of no. no.
I know. Well, thankfully it was like only 8 o'clock when it happened. So I was like, if I sleep now, I'll get like 12 hours of sleep and it'll be great. So that's just what we did.
I'm so glad you were able to pull through and get to go. Since that happened, have you had any moments where things were getting hard and you were like, you know what? If I could climb Kilimanjaro feeling as bad as I did, if I did that, I can do this now. You ever think back?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm like, girl, you did that. I think you can do this. There's definitely been times.
Well, thank you again, Morgan, for coming on. And to our listeners out there, if anyone has a story you'd like to share, there is a link in the description of this YouTube video where you can apply. Being a new podcast, if you could like this or share it with someone you think would enjoy it, that would really help us out. Till next time, hope you get a chance to get outdoors sometime soon.